Eala's been absolutely flawless since this final resumed.
10 of 13, that's the number. 10 of the 13 games played after that restart went to Eala. Not most of them, not a slight edge, 10 out of 13. And if you watched yesterday's video, you know I told you the rain delay was worth something. I said maybe a set. I said I could be wrong. I was wrong. I was wrong in the smallest way a person can be wrong, because I undersold it. Here is the final scoreline. 4-6, 6-4, 6-0. Eala is a Dubter Tour champion, and she did not back into it. She did not survive it. She took 10 of the last 13 games away from a top 3 player on American soil in front of a crowd that was supposed to belong to someone else, and she finished it with a bagel set. 6-0 against Jessica Pegula, world number 3, 2-time Washington champion. That is not a scoreline that happens by accident, and it is not a scoreline that happens to someone who got lucky with the weather. It happens to someone who was right about herself the entire time. So let's go back to noon on Monday, because the story of how this actually happened matters more than the number does. Remember where we left it. Pegula had the first set, 6-4. Eala had 2 games to 1 in the second, the only set still alive when play stopped Sunday night. 18 hours sat between those 2 women and the rest of this tournament. I told you the delay would hit them differently, that it would strip away rhythm before it stripped away instinct, and that Eala's whole game was built on the part that survives a cold restart. That was the theory. Monday was the test. And theories, no matter how good they sound the night before, mean nothing until somebody actually walks onto a court and lives them out. They walked back out at noon. No warm-up crowd, no easing in, just a scoreboard from the day before and a stadium full of people who had rearranged their entire Monday to be there. Whatever nerves exist in a moment like that, whatever you'd expect from a 21-year-old with no previous tour title, playing a final that had been interrupted, slept on, and reheated in front of that crowd, Eala did not show them. She held her nerve through the rest of that second set, and she took it. Final score in the second, 6-4. The set that was alive when the rain stopped stayed hers when it resumed. That alone would have been a good story. A split-set final heading to a decider, an underdog who weathered a delay and matched a top 3 player blow for blow. That's the version of this video I thought I might be making. But that's not what happened next. What happened next is the part nobody, including me, was fully ready for. The third set was not close. Eala won it 6-0. 6 games, 0 for Pegula, in a title match, against a woman who came into the week 20, 2-4 on hard courts this season, chasing her 3rd Washington trophy, and had already fought back from 5-2 down to beat Diana Schneider in a tight 3-setter just 2 days earlier to get here. That is a player who does not typically get shut out of a set on the biggest stage of her week. She did, and she did it in front of her own home crowd, on the surface where she has the most career hardware, at the tournament where she'd already won twice before. Think about what actually collapsed there. It wasn't luck, and it wasn't a bad day at the office for Pegula. It was momentum finding its true shape. The delay had already erased the fatigue gap and reset the rhythm clock in Eala's favor before a single point of the restart was played, exactly the way it looked on paper Sunday night. But paper doesn't win 6 straight games in a decider. A player does that by taking whatever advantage the day handed her and refusing to give a single game back once she felt it turning. Reuters described a dominant left-handed serve and fearless baseline hitting, pulling increasingly vocal support from a partisan crowd on Pegula's home soil in that third set. Read that again, on Pegula's home soil. And the noise still went the other way. That's the moment the theory turned into fact. That's the moment this stopped being about a rain delay and started being about a player who simply would not stop. And here's what makes that third set mean even more than the trophy itself. This wasn't a one-off. This wasn't Eala catching a great week at the right time. Reuters noted that the win extended her streak against top 10 opponents to 5 matches in a row, over Elena Rybakina, over Elina Svitolina twice, over Iga Swiatek, and now over Jessica Pegula. 5 consecutive results against the best players alive right now. That is not variance, that is a pattern, and patterns are the one thing in sport that cannot be explained away by circumstance, by weather, or by a friendly draw. When it was finally over, when the last ball landed and the trophy was hers, Eala didn't talk about the scoreline. She talked about where she came from and who got her there. On court, she said the love from her supporters, especially the Filipino community both in DC and back home, carried her through the whole week. She said that before Sunday's final, she'd received so many messages from her family and friends that standing there afterward, she felt surrounded by that love completely, and that whatever had happened after the match, the moment already meant something to her. Whatever happened after this match would have already been a win. Sit with that for a second. That's not the sentence of a player chasing a trophy out of desperation. That's the sentence of someone who had already made peace with the stakes before she ever knew the outcome, and then went out and won the thing anyway. Even Pegula, on the losing side of a scoreline that will sting for a while, didn't reach for excuses about the weather or the delay. She said she wanted to congratulate Eala on an incredible tournament, and that watching how far she'd come since they first shared a court, watching the fans who follow her everywhere, it wasn't fun to be on the other side of, but it was something remarkable to witness. Coming from a 3-time major finalist and a former world number 3, that's not a courtesy line handed out at every trophy ceremony. That's an acknowledgement from someone who just felt it happen to her in real time. Because here's what this title actually is. Beyond one trophy in Washington, Alexandra Eala is now the first player from the Philippines to win a Gaita Tour-level singles title. A country of over 115 million people, and until Monday, none of them had done this. She's spoken before about how strange it feels to be the first at something that big, and how much she wants that to mean something beyond her own career, that the only thing she can give back to her country is to inspire. Whatever else this week becomes in the history of her career, that sentence is now permanently attached to it. Years from now, this is the tournament people point to. The ranking tells the rest of the story in numbers. This result sends her to a career high of world number 20 when the new rankings are released. 20, somebody who, not long ago, was working her way up through the parts of tennis nobody televises, is now inside the top 20 players on the planet, with a 5-match winning streak against the top 10 sitting behind her name. That number alone would have been the headline in most weeks. This week, it's barely the third most important thing that happened, and it's worth putting that head-to-head with Pegula in context, because it wasn't nothing walking in. Pegula had won the only previous meeting between these two at the Miami Open semi-final back in 2025, closing it out in 3 sets. That result sat on the record for over a year as the one data point suggesting Pegula had Eala's number when it mattered. Monday erased that. Not by accident, not by forfeit, but by going through Pegula at her own tournament. On the surface, she's built 2 previous titles on and doing it with a bagel set to finish. If there was ever a version of the head-to-head matters, this was the match that rewrote it. Let's stay inside that 3rd set for one more moment, because the number alone doesn't tell you what it looked like. A 6-0 set in a final isn't built on one big shot. It's built on an opponent's options disappearing one game at a time. Every hold Pegula had leaned on for 2 hours starts to feel less automatic. Every service game that used to be routine turns into a fight just to stay level. And on the other side of the net, nothing changes. Eala's pattern doesn't need her to feel good. It doesn't need the crowd, though she had it. It doesn't need a slow start to find its footing, though by that point she'd already proven she didn't need one of those either. It just needs her to keep doing what she'd been doing all week, and by the 3rd set, Pegula simply ran out of answers to it. That's not a collapse. That's a system meeting its match and having nothing left to adjust with. And think about the position Pegula was actually in when that 3rd set started. She wasn't just facing a hot player. She was facing someone who 24 hours earlier, in the exact same conditions, had already shown the entire tour what a cold restart against her looks like in the other direction, back in round 1 against an Olympic champion. Down a set, back within a day, dominant by the finish. Pegula's coaching box had that tape. They knew the pattern. Knowing it and stopping it turned out to be 2 very different things. Now, a small footnote, because it happened in the same stadium on the same delayed Monday, and it's worth knowing. The men's final was pushed back by the same storm system. Taylor Fritz beat Rafa Joda in a tight two-setter to claim his own first title of the season, a result that gives him momentum heading toward the Canadian Open and, eventually, a US Open where he'll be one of the faces trying to end America's long wait for a men's Grand Slam singles champion. Different match, different story, same rain. Two players walked into that Monday delay and both walked out with a trophy. Make of that what you will about who actually benefits when a tournament gets sent home for the night. So go back to the question I left you with on Sunday night. What was 18 hours worth? I said I thought it was worth at least a set. The honest answer is that it was worth more than a set. It was worth the platform for a performance that had nothing left to prove about whether the theory held. The delay gave her the conditions to be at her best. What she did with those conditions, 10 of 13 games, a 6-0 set to close out a maiden title against the world number 3 on the other woman's home court, that part was never really about the weather. That part was just her. And if you want to know why this result should make everybody else in the draw nervous between now and New York, it's this. A major is exactly this kind of chaos, stretched over 2 weeks instead of 1 weekend. Delays, restarts, cold conditions, matches that don't go the way the first set suggested, crowds that shift and swell depending on who's still standing. Eala just proved, on the biggest stage of her career so far, that none of that breaks her. If anything, it's where she gets more dangerous. A player who wins on rhythm gets exposed by chaos. A player who wins on method gets fed by it. We now have real evidence, not theory, of which one she is. The next stop for both women is the Canadian Open. One more tune-up before the US Open begins in New York. I'll be watching that draw closely, and I'll have the breakdown here the moment there's something worth breaking down. If you want it the second it's live, you know what to do. Subscribe, and I'll see you at the next one.